The space station called Varith floated in the darkness between two distant stars. It was old, built by species that no longer existed, and now it served as a meeting place for traders, diplomats, and travelers from across the galaxy. Thousands of beings walked its metal corridors every day. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had no solid form at all. But on this particular morning, a human ship arrived at Docking Port 7, and everything was about to change. Commander Ben Harris stepped off the vessel called the Horizon and took his first breath of recycled station air. He was 42 years old, with short brown hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. His eyes were the color of Earth's oceans, a blue-green that seemed strange to most alien species who had never seen such a world. He had spent 12 years exploring the outer reaches of known space, and he thought he had seen everything the universe had to offer. He was wrong. Behind him came his crew. There was Katie Moore, his communications officer, a young woman of 28 with red hair and a quick smile. There was Danny Cole, the ship's engineer, who was always covered in grease and always humming old songs from Earth. There was Maria Santos, the medical officer, quiet and observant, who noticed things others missed. And there were others, 15 crew members in total, all of them carrying the curiosity that seemed to define their species. The station administrator met them at the airlock. He was a Velian, a short creature with gray skin and 4 arms. His name was difficult for human tongues, so he told them to call him Grath. He looked at the humans with an expression that was hard to read. "Welcome to Station Varith," he said. His voice came through a translator device that hung around his neck. "You are the first humans to visit this sector. I must warn you that not all species here will be friendly." Ben nodded. He had expected this. Humanity was new to the galactic community, having only discovered faster than light travel 30 years ago. Most species saw them as primitives, children stumbling into a room full of adults. Some found them amusing. Some found them annoying. And some, Ben knew, found them dangerous. "We are here to negotiate trade agreements," Ben said. "Nothing more. We mean no harm to anyone." Grath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is what you say. But your species has a reputation, Commander. You feel things too strongly. You act on emotion rather than logic. Many here believe that makes you unpredictable." Ben smiled. "Maybe it does. But it also makes us good friends to have." Grath stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged with all 4 shoulders. "Follow me. The Kithrin delegation is already waiting." The name sent a murmur through the human crew. The Kithrins were legendary, even among species that had traveled the stars for millennia. They had built an empire that spanned 300 worlds. Their technology was advanced beyond anything humanity had achieved. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their medicine capable of extending life for centuries. But what made them truly famous was something else entirely. The Kithrins did not feel, or rather, they had trained themselves over thousands of years to suppress all emotion. They believed that feelings were a weakness, a flaw in biological design that led to poor decisions and unnecessary suffering. They did not love. They did not hate. They did not feel joy or sorrow or anything in between. They simply existed, cold and perfect and utterly alone. Ben had read about them in the briefing files. He had studied their history, their culture, their philosophy. But nothing prepared him for actually seeing them. The delegation waited in a large conference room with windows that looked out at the stars. There were 5 of them, standing in perfect stillness like statues carved from silver. Their skin was pale, almost metallic, and it seemed to shift color slightly depending on how the light touched it. They were tall and slender, with long limbs and fingers that had 1 extra joint compared to humans. Their faces were smooth, with high cheekbones and small noses. Their eyes were the most striking feature, large and dark, like pools of ink that reflected nothing. Ben felt his crew tense behind him. Even Katie, who was usually the first to smile at strangers, seemed uncertain. One of the Kithrans stepped forward. She was slightly shorter than the others, though still taller than any human in the room. Her silver hair was pulled back from her face, and she wore a simple gray uniform with no decoration. When she spoke, her voice was flat, completely without tone or inflection. "I am Velis Sarn," she said. "I have been assigned as liaison for these negotiations. You are the human commander. It was not a question. Ben nodded anyway. "I am Ben Harris. Thank you for meeting with us. Vel I studied him with those dark eyes." She did not blink. Ben realized with a small shock that he had not seen any of the Kithrans blink since he entered the room. "Your thanks is unnecessary," Velis said. "This meeting serves a purpose. Personal sentiment is irrelevant." Ben opened his mouth to respond, but he was not sure what to say. In human culture, thanking someone was basic politeness. It was how people showed respect and appreciation. But to the Kithrans, it seemed to mean nothing at all. The negotiations began, and they were exactly as difficult as Ben had expected. The Kithrans wanted access to certain minerals found in human-controlled space. Humanity wanted access to Kithran, medical technology that could cure diseases that still killed millions on Earth. Both sides had something the other wanted, but neither side trusted the other. Velith handled most of the talking for the Kithrans. She spoke in that same flat voice, presenting facts and figures without any attempt at persuasion. She did not smile. She did not frown. She did not gesture with her hands or lean forward with interest or do any of the hundreds of small things that humans did when they communicated. And yet, Ben found himself watching her. There was something in her eyes, he thought. Something behind that mask of perfect calm. He could not name it, could not even be sure it was real. But he felt it, the way he sometimes felt a storm coming before the first clouds appeared in the sky. Katie noticed him staring and nudged his arm. "Everything okay, Commander?" she whispered. Ben nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just have a feeling this mission is going to be more interesting than we expected." He had no idea how right he was. When the first day of negotiations ended, the humans returned to their ship to rest. But Ben could not sleep. He stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars, thinking about a silver-skinned woman who did not know how to smile. Somewhere on the station, Velith Soren was doing the same thing. She stood alone in her assigned room, reviewing the day's events in her mind. The humans were strange, she decided. Inefficient, emotional, weak. And yet, when the one called Ben Harris had looked at her, she had felt something flutter in her chest. A small thing barely noticeable. She told herself it was nothing. A minor biological malfunction. It would pass. She was wrong too. The days turned into weeks, and the negotiations continued. Both sides argued over numbers and terms and conditions that seemed endless. But while the diplomats talked, something else was happening. Something quieter and far more important. Velasaran began to study the humans. At first, she told herself it was professional interest. She needed to understand these strange creatures if she was going to negotiate with them effectively. So she watched them during meetings. She observed them in the station's common areas. She listened to their conversations when they did not know she was there. What she discovered confused her more than anything she had ever encountered. The humans touched each other constantly. They put hands on shoulders. They patted backs. They hugged when they met and hugged again when they parted. Katie Moore, the young communications officer, seemed incapable of talking to anyone without making physical contact at least once. In Kithran society, touching was reserved for medical procedures and reproduction. The idea of touching someone simply because you wanted to was almost unthinkable. But the touching was only the beginning. The humans also smiled. They smiled when they were happy. They smiled when they were sad. They smiled when they met strangers and when they told jokes and when they ate food they enjoyed. Their faces were never still, always moving, always expressing something. Velith tried to catalog all the different types of smiles she observed. There was the big smile that showed teeth, which seemed to indicate great happiness. There was the small smile that only lifted the corners of the mouth, which suggested mild amusement or politeness. There was the smile that did not reach the eyes, which the humans called fake. There was the smile that came with tears, which made no sense at all. She recorded all of this in her personal notes. She told herself it was research. One evening, she was walking through the station's recreation deck when she heard something that made her stop. It was a sound unlike anything in her experience. A series of tones that rose and fell in patterns that seemed both random and perfectly ordered at the same time. She followed the sound to a small room, where Katie Moore sat with a device in her lap. The device had strings stretched across a hollow body, and Katie was pressing the strings with her fingers while her other hand moved across them, creating that strange and wonderful noise. Velith stood in the doorway, frozen. Katie looked up and smiled. "Oh, hi there. Sorry, am I being too loud?" Velith did not answer. She could not. The sound had done something to her, something she did not understand. Her chest felt tight. Her hands were trembling slightly. "What is that?" she finally asked. Katie looked down at the device. It is a guitar. A musical instrument. Musical instrument. Velith knew these words, but only as abstract concepts. The Kithrans had eliminated music from their culture 3,000 years ago. It served no practical purpose. It was inefficient. But this sound was not inefficient. This sound was like nothing Velith had ever experienced. "What does it do?" she asked. Katie laughed. A sound that Velith had learned indicated amusement or joy. "It does not really do anything, I guess. It just makes music." But why got Katie thought about this for a moment? Because it feels good to listen to. And it feels good to play. She strummed the strings again, and another wave of sound filled the room. Music is how we express feelings that words cannot capture. When we are happy, we sing. When we are sad, we sing. When we are in love, we write songs about it. In love. Velith had heard this phrase before, but did not understand it. "What is love?" she asked. Katie stared at her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she set the guitar aside and patted the seat next to her. "Sit down," she said. This might take a while to explain. Velith hesitated. Sitting close to another being was not something Kithrans did, but something made her move forward anyway. She sat down, leaving a careful distance between herself and the human. Katie took a deep breath. Love is when you care about someone more than you care about yourself. It is when seeing them happy makes you happy. It is when you would do anything to protect them, even if it costs you everything. She paused. Love is not logical. It does not make sense if you try to analyze it. But it is the most important thing humans have. Velith processed this information. It did not match anything in her cultural database. And this love, she said slowly, you feel it for specific individuals. Yes, we love our families. We love our friends. Sometimes we love strangers who become important to us. And sometimes, Katie smiled, we fall in love with one special person and want to spend our whole lives with them. Velith felt that flutter in her chest again. She ignored it. This seems very inefficient, she said. Katie laughed again. Maybe it is, but I would not trade it for anything. They sat in silence for a while. Then Katie picked up the guitar again and began to play a slow, soft melody. The notes drifted through the air like something physical, Like something Velith could almost touch, she stayed and listened until the song ended. Then she returned to her quarters and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to her. The next day, she requested additional meetings with the human delegation. She told her superiors it was to gather intelligence on human negotiating strategies. This was a lie, the first lie she had ever told. She wanted to understand these creatures. She needed to understand them. Ben Harris noticed the change. Velith began asking questions that had nothing to do with trade agreements. She asked about human history, human art, human relationships. She asked why humans kept animals as companions when the animals served no practical purpose. She asked why humans decorated their living spaces with objects that had no function. She asked why humans told each other stories about things that never happened. Ben answered as best he could. He explained that beauty mattered to humans, that they found meaning in things beyond survival, that life was not just about existing but about experiencing. Velith listened to everything he said. She took mental notes. And slowly, without realizing it, she began to change. She found herself noticing the way light fell through the station's windows in the morning. She found herself listening for the sound of human laughter in the corridors. She found herself looking at her own reflection and wondering, for the first time in her life, what she looked like to others. This was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. If her superiors discovered what was happening to her, she would be sent back to the homeworld for reconditioning. The emotions she was developing would be carefully removed, erased like errors in a computer program. But she could not stop. She did not want to stop. On the evening before the final round of negotiations, Ben found her standing alone at a viewport, watching a distant nebula glow in colors that had no names in her language. He walked up and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. It is beautiful, is it not? Ben finally said. Velith turned to look at him. That word again. Beautiful. It appeared constantly in human speech, applied to everything from sunsets to songs to other people. Her translator struggled with it every time. What does that mean? She asked. Beautiful. Ben smiled. It means something that makes you feel good, just by looking at it. Something that fills you with wonder or happiness or peace. Velith looked back at the nebula. The colors swirled and shifted, purple and gold and deep red, like nothing she had ever seen on her homeworld. I think, she said slowly, I might understand. Ben did not say anything. He just stood beside her, warm and alive, while the universe painted itself across the darkness. And Velith Sarin, who had been taught all her life that emotions were weakness, felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been locked away for 3,000 years of Kithran evolution. Something that felt like waking up. The final negotiations were successful. Both sides got what they wanted. The humans would gain access to Kithran medical technology that could save millions of lives. The Kithrans would gain mining rights in human-controlled space. On paper, it was a perfect agreement. But for Velith Sarin, nothing felt perfect anymore. She stood in the observation deck of Station Vareth, watching the human ship prepare for departure. In a few hours, Ben Harris and his crew would leave. They would return to their own space, to their own world, and Velith would never see them again. This thought caused physical pain in her chest. She did not understand why. The negotiations were concluded, she told herself. The mission was complete. There was no logical reason for the humans to stay, and no logical reason for her to want them to. And yet, the pain remained. She pressed her hand against the viewport, feeling the cold of space through the glass. You are going to miss them. The voice came from behind her. Velith turned to find one of her fellow Kithrans standing in the doorway. His name was Taral, and he was the senior diplomat of their delegation. His dark eyes studied her with an expression she could not read. I do not know what you mean, Velith said. Tarl walked forward until he stood beside her. Do not lie to me. I have observed you during these weeks. You have changed. I have not changed. You smile now. Tarl said this as if it were an accusation. When you do not think anyone is watching, you smile. Velith felt cold. This was worse than she had feared. If Tarl reported her behavior to their superiors, she would be recalled immediately. It is nothing, she said. A temporary malfunction. It will pass. Tarl was silent for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He turned to look out the viewport, and his voice became softer. I was young once, he said. Before my first reconditioning. I remember what it felt like to want things. To hope? To feel the pull of another being's presence. He paused. It is not a malfunction, Velith. It is what we were before our ancestors decided to cut away half of our souls. Velith stared at him. She had never heard another Kithaeron speak like this. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you still have a choice. Tarl finally looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen in a Kithaeron face before. Something like sadness. I was too afraid to make the choice when I was your age. I let them take everything that made life worth living. Do not make my mistake. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Velith stood at the viewport for a long time. Her mind was racing, processing everything Tarl had said. For her entire life, she had been taught that the Kithaeron way was superior, that emotions were primitive and dangerous, that the cold logic of her people was the highest form of existence. But now she was not sure anymore. The humans were emotional, illogical, and unpredictable. And yet they seemed more alive than any Kithaeron she had ever known. She made a decision. The human ship was scheduled to depart at 1800 hours station time. Velith arrived at docking port 7 at 1730, her heart pounding in a way she had never experienced. She was not sure what she was going to say. She only knew that she had to say something. Ben was supervising the final loading of supplies when he saw her approaching. He smiled that warm human smile and walked over to meet her. Velith, I was hoping I would see you before we left. Velith opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had spent hours preparing what she wanted to say. But now, standing in front of him, everything had disappeared from her mind. Ben seemed to understand. He gestured toward a quiet corner of the docking bay, away from the busy crew members. Walk with me for a minute, he said. They walked together in silence until they reached a small alcove with a window that looked out at the nebula. The same nebula they had watched together the night before. I wanted to thank you, Velith finally said, for showing me things I never knew existed. Ben looked at her curiously. What kind of things? Music. Stories. The way light looks in the morning. She struggled to find the right words. I have lived for 93 years, and I never noticed any of these things until you and your crew arrived. 93. Ben shook his head in amazement. That is incredible. On Earth, you would barely be middle-aged. Kithaerons live for many centuries. It is one of the few advantages of our biology. Velith paused. But I'm beginning to think that a long life without meaning is worse than a short life filled with wonder. Ben did not respond immediately. He just looked at her, his blue-green eyes reflecting the colors of the nebula. Then he said something that would change everything. You know, Velith, in all my years of space travel, I have met hundreds of different species. Some of them had 10 eyes. Some of them lived in gas clouds. Some of them were so strange I could barely recognize them as alive. But I have never met anyone quite like you. Velith felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? Ben smiled again, but this time there was something different in it. Something warmer. I mean that you are beautiful, he said. Velith froze. The word hit her like a physical force. Her translator device hummed frantically, cycling through dozens of possible interpretations. The closest it could offer was possessing qualities that inspired deep positive emotional response through sensory perception. But that was not quite right. That did not capture the way Ben was looking at her when he said it. "What does that word mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Beautiful. I have heard it many times, but I do not understand it fully." Ben thought for a moment. "It means that looking at you makes me feel something good. Something like happiness and wonder mixed together." He reached out and very gently touched her hand. "It means that the universe did something right when it made you." Veleth looked down at his hand on hers. In Kithran culture, this kind of touch would be unthinkable. But she did not pull away. "No one has ever said anything like that to me," she said. "In my entire 93 years of existence, my people do not see beauty. We do not feel wonder. We have removed those parts of ourselves." "That sounds lonely," Ben said softly. Veleth looked up at him. "I did not know it was lonely until I met you." They stood there for a long moment, hand in hand, while the nebula painted colors across the darkness outside. Veleth felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not even know Kithrans could cry. Perhaps they had simply forgotten how. The ship's horn sounded, signaling the final departure warning. Ben looked toward the docking port, then back at Veleth. "I have to go," he said. "But I do not want this to be goodbye. What choice do we have?" Veleth asked. "You must return to your people. I must return to mine." Ben squeezed her hand. "There is always a choice. If you ever want to leave, if you ever want to find out what it means to really live, there is a place for you on the horizon." Velith stared at him. "Are you serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." The horn sounded again. Ben released her hand and began walking toward his ship. At the edge of the docking port, he turned back one final time. "Think about it," he said. "The universe is big, Veleth. Big enough for second chances." Then he was gone, disappearing into the ship that would carry him across the stars. Veleth stood alone in the docking bay, watching the horizon detach from the station and slowly drift toward open space. She watched until it was nothing but a point of light, among millions of other points of light. And for the first time in her very long life, she knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted to feel beautiful. 3 months passed. For Veleth, they were the longest 3 months of her life. She returned to her homeworld after the negotiations ended, as she was expected to do. She filed her reports. She attended her meetings. She performed her duties with the same cold efficiency that had defined her entire career. But inside, everything had changed. She could not stop thinking about what Ben Harris had said to her. The word beautiful echoed in her mind like a song she could not forget. She found herself staring at sunsets and wondering if they were beautiful. She found herself listening to the sound of wind and wondering if it was beautiful. She found herself looking at her own reflection and trying to see what he had seen. This was madness. She knew it was madness. A Kithran did not think such thoughts. A Kithran did not feel such feelings. And yet, she could not make them stop. She began to research human culture in secret. She accessed databases that were restricted, downloading files about human art and music and literature. She read human poetry and found herself crying at words that should have meant nothing to her. She listened to human songs and felt her heart ache with emotions. She had no names for . She learned about a human concept called love, not the clinical definition she had received from Katie. More on the station, but the deeper truth of it. She read stories of people who had sacrificed everything for love. She read about lovers who had crossed oceans and continents and even death itself to be together. She read about the way humans would rather die than live without the ones they cared about. It was illogical. It was irrational. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever encountered. and slowly, painfully, she began to understand what was happening to her. She was falling in love with Ben Harris. The realization hit her one night while she was sitting alone in her quarters, watching the stars through her window. She thought about his smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the warmth of his hand when he touched hers. She thought about how he made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her long life. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she could not stay on her homeworld any longer. The decision to leave was not easy. She had spent 93 years building a life among her people. She had rank and status and a future that was carefully planned out for centuries to come. Walking away from all of that was the most terrifying thing she had ever considered. But staying was worse. Staying meant returning to the cold emptiness that had defined her existence before. She met the humans. Staying meant pretending that she had not changed, that she had not awakened, that she had not felt the first stirrings of something that made life worth living. Staying meant dying slowly from the inside while her body continued to function perfectly. She would rather take the risk. She began to plan her escape in secret. She quietly transferred her personal funds to accounts that could not be traced. She gathered the few possessions that mattered to her. She memorized the route to human-controlled space and calculated how long it would take in a standard shuttle. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Tar El Dot. She found him in his office late one evening, working on reports that did not need to be filed for weeks. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set his work aside. "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. Yes. Tar El nodded slowly. He did not seem surprised. To find him. To find myself. Veleth paused. He showed me that there is more to existence than what we have been taught. I need to discover what that means. Tar El was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a small data chip. "Take this," he said. "It contains information that might help you. Star charts, frequencies, the locations of others who have left over the centuries." Veleth stared at him. "Others have left, more than you would believe." The old diplomat smiled, and for a moment he looked almost young again. "We tell ourselves that we have evolved beyond emotion, but the truth is that we have only learned to bury it. Every generation, there are those who refuse to stay buried." Veleth took the chip and pressed it to her chest. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me." Tarl stood and placed his hands on her shoulders. It was the most intimate gesture a Kithran could make. "Just live. Live the way I was too afraid to live. I will. I promise." She left that night. Her shuttle was small and fast, designed for diplomatic missions. It was not meant for long journeys, but it would get her far enough. She set a course for the edge of Kithran space and engaged the autopilot. For 2 weeks, she flew through the darkness between stars. She had plenty of time to think, plenty of time to doubt, plenty of time to wonder if she was making the worst mistake of her very long life. But every time the doubt crept in, she remembered Ben's face in the glow of the nebula. She remembered the way he looked at her when he called her beautiful. She remembered the warmth of his hand and the sound of his voice. And the doubt faded away. She crossed into neutral space on the 14th day. From there, it was another week to the human border. She sent out a signal on the frequency Tarol had given her, identifying herself as a friend seeking contact with the exploration vessel Horizon. The response came within hours. "Vel ite. Is that really you?" Ben's voice filled her small cockpit. And suddenly everything she had endured was worth it. "It is me," she said. "I have come to take you up on your offer." There was a pause, and when Ben spoke again, she could hear the smile in his voice. "I will send you coordinates. We will meet you halfway." 3 days later, Vela saw the horizon for the first time since leaving Station Vareth. It was a beautiful ship, sleek and strong, designed for exploration and discovery. As her shuttle approached the docking port, she could see figures gathering at the windows to watch her arrival. The docking procedure was smooth. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. And there, standing at the entrance with that warm human smile, was Ben Harris. Velith stepped off her shuttle and stood before him. She did not know what to say. She had traveled across half the galaxy to be here, had given up everything she knew for the chance to feel alive. And now that the moment had arrived, words seemed insufficient. Ben did not seem to need words. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace. It was the first time in her life that Velith had been hugged. She stood stiff for a moment, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, she let herself relax into his warmth. She wrapped her own arms around him and held on as if she would never let go. Welcome home. Ben whispered Dot, and standing there in the arms of a human who had crossed the stars to meet her. Velosaurn finally understood what that word meant. Home was not a place. It was not a planet or a ship or a station. Home was wherever someone saw you and called you beautiful. Home was wherever you were loved. 5 years passed. Velosaurn stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching a new star system appear on the view screen. She had seen hundreds of such systems since joining the human crew, but the wonder never faded. Every sunrise, every nebula, every distant world filled her with the same quiet joy she had first felt when Ben called her beautiful. She was no longer the cold diplomat who had arrived at Station Verith so long ago. She smiled now. She laughed. She cried when stories moved her and sang when Katie taught her human songs. The crew had become her family, and Ben had become something even more precious. But today was not about her. Today was about the message that would change the galaxy. It had started 2 years ago when Velith began writing. At first, she wrote only for herself, recording her experiences among the humans in simple words that any Kithran could understand. She wrote about music and art and the way light looked in the morning. She wrote about friendship and laughter and the strange, wonderful feeling of being cared for. She wrote about love. Then, one day, she decided to share what she had written. She encrypted the files and sent them to the channels Tarol had given her, the secret networks where other Kithran defectors communicated. She expected nothing. Perhaps a few dozen would read her words. Perhaps they would find some comfort in knowing they were not alone. She had no idea. Once she had started, her writings spread like fire. They passed from defector to defector, then leaked somehow into mainstream Kithran communications. Young Kithrans, those who had not yet received their full conditioning, read her words in secret. They shared them with friends. They asked questions that their elders could not answer. Why do we suppress emotion? What are we afraid of? Is there more to existence than cold efficiency? The Kithran government tried to contain the damage. They banned Velith's writings. They increased surveillance on young people. They scheduled more frequent reconditioning sessions for anyone who showed signs of emotional development. But it was too late. The idea had taken root. And ideas were harder to kill than people. Now, 2 years later, Velith stood on the bridge of the horizon with a new message ready to transmit. This one was different. This one was not just for defectors hiding in the shadows. This one was for everyone. She had recorded a video. In it, she stood beside Ben, holding his hand, with the crew of the horizon gathered around them. She spoke directly to the camera, to every Kithran who might be watching. My name is Velosaurn, she said. I was born on the homeworld 98 years ago. I was raised to believe that emotion was weakness, that feeling was failure, that the highest form of existence was cold logic, untouched by sentiment. I believed this for most of my life. I was wrong. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 5 years ago, a human looked at me and called me beautiful. I did not understand the word. It had no translation in our language. no equivalent in our culture. But the way he said, it made me feel something I had never felt before. It made me feel like I mattered. Not for what I could do, or what I could produce, or how efficiently I could perform my duties. I mattered simply because I existed. She squeezed Ben's hand and continued. Since then, I have learned what it means to be alive. I have learned to appreciate music and art and stories. I have learned to love and to be loved in return. I have learned that a life without feeling is not a higher form of existence. It is a prison. She looked directly into the camera. To my brothers and sisters on the homeworld. To the young ones who feel that something is missing. To anyone who has ever wondered if there is more to life than what we have been taught, I want you to know that you are right. There is more. So much more. The universe is full of beauty. It is full of wonder and joy and terrible sadness and breathtaking hope. These are not weaknesses to be eliminated. They are gifts to be cherished. They are what make us alive. She smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that lit up her entire face. I am not asking you to leave your homes or abandon your families. I am only asking you to open your eyes, to let yourself feel, to look at a sunset and wonder if it is beautiful, to listen to a song and let it move you, to hold someone's hand and feel the warmth of their presence. This is what the humans have taught me. This is what changed my life. And I believe, with all my heart, that it can change yours too. She reached forward and ended the recording. Ben looked at her. Are you sure about this? Velith nodded. More sure than I have ever been about anything. She pressed the transmit button. The message went out across the galaxy, broadcast on every frequency that could reach Kithrin space. Velith knew it'd be intercepted, blocked, suppressed. But she also knew that some copies would get through. Some young Kithrin somewhere would see her face and hear her words, and feel something stir in their chest. And that would be enough. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within months, reports began trickling in from across Kithrin space. Young people were gathering in secret to discuss emotion and art and beauty. Underground movements were forming, sharing music and poetry and stories that had been forbidden for 3,000 years. Some were caught and reconditioned. But for everyone that was silenced, 10 more rose to take their place. Within a year, the first open protests began. Kithrins who had never shown emotion in their lives stood in public squares and wept, just to prove that they could. They sang songs and painted pictures and held hands with strangers. The government tried to stop them, but there were too many. Within 5 years, the Kithrin Empire was transformed. It did not happen overnight. There was resistance, conflict, generations of conditioning that could not be undone in a moment. But the change was real, and it was permanent. The Kithrins did not become humans. They remained their own people, with their own culture and their own way of experiencing the universe. But they were no longer empty. They had learned to feel. And through it all, Velith watched from the bridge of the horizon, the human ship that had become her home. She was old now by human standards, though still young by Kithrin ones. She had seen things she never dreamed possible. She had loved and lost and loved again. She had lived. One evening, as the ship orbited a quiet moon, Ben found her at their favorite viewport. He was gray-haired now, slower than he used to be, but his smile was still the same. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Regret what? Leaving everything behind. Giving up your world for someone who called you beautiful. Velith turned to look at him. She studied his face, the face she had loved for so many years, and she smiled. You gave me something better than a world, she said. You gave me a life worth living. Ben took her hand, and they stood together at the window, watching the stars dot far across the galaxy on 100 different worlds. Kithrins were looking at the same stars and feeling the same wonder. They were falling in love and making art and singing songs. They were living, truly living. For the first time in 3,000 years. All because one human had looked at a silver-skinned woman and seen something worth admiring. All because he had been brave enough to say it out loud. This was the gift that humanity gave the stars. Not technology or military power or strategic brilliance. Something simpler. Something more profound. The courage to tell someone they mattered. The willingness to see beauty in the unfamiliar. The understanding that emotion was not weakness, but strength. And in the end, that was enough to change the universe.